Saturday morning shone through the bedroom windows onto the slumber of James Healy and Claire Chesterton wrapped up in their ornate double bed. She was resting her head on his chest whilst he played with her hair. "See, you don't need to go out to have a good time," said James, slyly continuing the argument from the previous night. "No, I guess I stand corrected," Claire grudgingly agreed. "But we can't just shut ourselves off from the world." She never was able to let an argument lie. "Maybe not, but there is something romantic about the idea," smiled James, not wanting this to escalate into an argument again. Claire was just about to reply when the phone rang. She picked it up and instantly started squealing down the phone with that vivacious, bubbly character of hers. James watched her as she became totally consumed in the conversation. "I take it that was Chloe," James offered dryly as she put down the receiver. She was always the same when Chloe rang. It was like she became a giddy schoolgirl excited by the mischief they could get up to together. "Yeah, she wants us to come out tonight to that new club that's just opened in the center of town. Apparently there are several different theme rooms, 60s, 70s, 80s. You'll love it, you can spend all your time in the 80s room," she said enthusiastically. James knew that this was one of those times when arguing would prove utterly futile. "I, on the other hand, will spend most of my time in the 60s room dancing, then I think I'll chill in the 70s room," she proclaimed, bunching her dark mahogany hair into a ponytail as she stood. Claire spoke euphemistically. She liked her mind-expanding substances, particularly when she was drunk. James' face turned to dread at the thought of it. He hated clubbing with a passion. He'd much sooner have an intellectual conversation than battle his natural self-consciousness trying to dance. Claire, on the other hand, was a natural. She looked amazing on the dance floor, her perfect, svelte figure, a revealing outfit, her Latin hereditary giving her all the self-confidence she needed to really let go and enjoy herself. James stared as she inspected herself in the mirror. Was it out of pure vanity that she went through this meticulous process every morning? Or was it to look good for him, her boyfriend of near enough 18 months? She continued to fiddle with her eyebrows as he gazed over her beautiful body hidden only by the flimsy lilac t-shirt and shorts. Sometimes they were so different, but sometimes they were so alike. As much as he adored her in those moments of privacy, she also had another side to her, the one that wanted to live life to the full, to sample the assorted fruits of life and say no to nothing. Claire finished her inspection and flashed a smile at James as she danced toward the shower. She was definitely excited about tonight. The day rolled quickly by and Claire went out shopping with Chloe for a new dress, leaving James watching TV as the football results came in. Arriving back home, she approached him with a devilish look on her face. "I've got something special for tonight," she whispered in his ear as he sat on the settee. "Can I see it?" he asked, feeling lightly aroused at the thought of her in another skimpy dress. "Not until later," she teased. "What, when every other guy will be staring at you too?" "That's not fair," he protested. "It's totally fair, I'm only going to be returning with you. I'm going to get changed, we have to be at Chloe's for 7. And with that she hopped out of the room. James placed the single can of lager he'd been sipping all afternoon on the side and pondered the night ahead, sinking into the couch. The nervy cold feeling in his chest increased as he foresaw images of Claire turning from Jekyll into Hyde, except Hyde was a dance-crazed, flirtatious, nubile young woman who exuded it. And God, she was sexy. Her shoulder-length brown hair, her creamy skin and smooth, curvaceous body. Any guy would run laps to get her. Increasingly, James suspected he wasn't up to the task. Claire was busy turning herself into James' vision of Hyde upstairs. After around an hour she tiptoed cat-like into the front room where he was still sitting. Upon noticing her he involuntarily rose to his feet. She looked stunning, her eyes huge and iridescent. The skimpy black dress was tied around her neck and once around the small of her back, exposing virtually all of it. She cut a figure of imposing femininity, her flaming red high heels matching her lipstick and making her as tall as James at 5'9". He almost couldn't handle her. "You look amazing," he said, breathlessly touching her slim waist. Her smile broadened and she hugged him, whispering in his ear, "I can't wait for tonight." Intoxicated by her sweet perfume, James' hands traveled around the bare flesh of her back and he quickly noticed she'd neglected to wear a bra. He was getting aroused. "We can't stay like this forever, you've got to get ready. We've only got half an hour until we need to be at Chloe's," ordered Claire, breaking the embrace. James disappointedly left for the bathroom, beside himself at how alluring Claire looked. He could already tell tonight was going to be something memorable. A couple of hours later at Chloe's the beer and wine was flowing as much as the laughter and joking. Not really having much of a palate for alcohol, James just listened as Claire, Chloe, and some other friends he didn't know exchanged stories. He found his eyes continually wandering over Claire and Chloe as they sat next to each other, displaying liberal amounts of bare flesh without a second thought. Both of their dresses were as short as each other, just barely covering their backsides. Any twirls on the dance floor would offer an eyeful to any looking and plenty would be. Chloe had invited 2 male friends who sat on the left of James, one was called Dave, the other, Carrick. James couldn't believe that name, how pretentious it sounded. They were both bigger and quite a lot louder than him too, wearing tight t-shirts showing off the muscles they'd acquired at the gym. And both were unnervingly self-confident and untoward. James thought about the implications of this for his own masculinity. They're bigger than me, more extroverted, but probably have the combined intelligence of a cabbage. Why should I compare myself to them? I'm far more intelligent. But the thought provided scant comfort. Their boorishness continued as James sat largely ignored by the frantic exchanges of conversation, glances and flirtation going on before him. Claire really had morphed into James' vision of Hyde by now. She was wide-eyed and vivacious, openly flirting with the guys and giggling with Chloe. "So, who are you sleeping with at the moment, Chloe?" asked Carrick, cheekily grinning with his tan trunk-like arms folded across his chest. She looked at him with her mouth open in pretend shock. "What's it to you, big guy? Think you have a chance?" Suddenly James was intrigued by the conversation. He knew Chloe was hot, she had more of an hourglass figure and was known for sleeping around. And she certainly wasn't bashful. "You haven't even been with a man until you've experienced muscles like these," said Carrick, unfolding his arms and tensing his biceps. Chloe and Claire just looked at each other before they burst out laughing. "So are all your muscles that big and strong, Tarquin?" grinned Claire before biting her tongue between her front teeth as she always does when her interest is piqued. "Of course, feel this," gruffed Carrick, offering his bicep to Claire. She reached over with her delicate hand and grabbed his muscle with her mouth slightly agape. My, we are a big strong boy," she exclaimed, feeling the heat of lust rise in her cheeks as her eyes locked with Carrick's, aware her boyfriend was watching every move. Chloe burst out laughing again. "Feel it, Chloe, it is quite impressive. Maybe you should start going to the gym, James?" Her suggestion to James was met only by silence and a frown. Claire continued to squeeze the muscle for longer than was really necessary as Carrick tensed and retensed his bulging biceps for her. "Hey, you can't hog it all night, let me feel," squealed Chloe in drunken tones as she lurched forward, offering quite a sight of her cleavage. "Hey, do you want to feel it too, James?" taunted Chloe before she and Claire burst out in fits of laughter at some tenuous implication James didn't quite understand but which they clearly did. The laughter went on for several minutes to James' mute reaction. An embarrassment burned in him as he squirmed in the chair, victim of their mocking. This is what he was growing to despise about his girlfriend. "We're only kidding," said Claire, trying to calm the waters before Chloe instantly chipped in, "I wasn't." They burst out laughing again. Dave and Carrick looked at each other and shook their heads, smiling at the naughty behavior of the girls. "At least I haven't got a first name like Carrick," muttered James inaudibly under his breath, trying to regain some composure. When the giggling stopped and both girls had wiped tears of laughter from their eyes, Dave questioned exactly how they were going to get to the club. After much drunken misdirection and fumbling, they eventually rang for a taxi. James had half a mind to tell them to go on ahead, that he'd rather go home and sleep off his troubles. But he knew this would upset Claire, despite the fact that whenever they got to a club he barely saw her again all night. Often, they ended up getting separate rides home, she rolling in good few hours after he'd got home at 4 a.m. He remembered the exact times because she always woke him up and wanted to do it. It never failed to be an insatiable, hot session, and she always tasted like a bewitching cocktail of alcohol, cigarettes, and lust. He knew that dancing made her horny, and that's what she loved most about it. They arrived at the club. It looked huge with loud music pumping from every pore. Every available space was jam-packed with people dancing in the murky atmosphere, half cloaked by the dry ice that plumed out, providing relative anonymity for all. James waited to get his ticket as familiar images caught his eyes of people kissing on the dance floor, scantily clad girls dancing in cages, people drunkenly stumbling around, and others smoking dubious substances quite openly. His heart rate began to rise, and he started to think that it would be better to be completely drunk in a place like this than almost sober. Those same images just seemed to make Claire and Chloe more excited. After acquiring the tickets, Claire then turned to James and spoke at him rapidly. "Me and Carrick are going to the 60s lounge, you're going to the 80s lounge, aren't you? I'll come and find you in a bit." Without waiting for an answer, she kissed James on the forehead and strode away from him, dragging Carrick by the hand along with her. Claire could feel her growing lust as she thought about dancing with Carrick in the mist. Chloe and Dave headed for the more laid-back 70s lounge as James just stood there self-consciously trying to be unself-conscious by himself. He wandered around for half an hour before locating the 80s lounge. They played thumping dance remixes of 80s classics, and the room was decorated in a vague 80s style. Presumably it was the same formula for each subsequent room, James reasoned. He sat in a corner watching as people danced, quietly detesting the whole concept. Little did he know that right at that moment his girlfriend was just getting into her routine on the dance floor in the 60s lounge. Claire Chesterton was gyrating her hips in seemingly impossible motions as she danced with her back to the muscular Carrick Jones. He moved closer so Claire could feel his hard chest against the open back of her dress, his arms encircling her. Despite his proximity, her gyrating never slowed. Carrick's hands moved up her smooth stomach holding her hard against him. Claire loved it. The thought of dancing with another guy whilst her boyfriend of 18 months was somewhere in the building aroused her no end every week. As she twirled, her skirt caught the air and rose. She spun around several more times fully aware of the view that she was affording many onlookers. Then her eyes came to rest on Carrick's, as she joined her hands behind the back of his neck and danced even more provocatively. Gradually, Claire moved her body closer to his as the music continued to pound. She wanted to see just how far she could push this tonight. This time she could feel something. She continued to bump and grind against him as Carrick's hands and he glimpsed down the front of her dress. She made no attempt to arrest the progress of this ritual. Her breathing was becoming shallower. God, she loved dancing. All the while, Carrick's hands were slowly drifting southwards down the back of her dress. He was now using his strong hands to massage her against him. More dancing, then suddenly they drifted again as he became more and more daring. Claire's eyes widened with the dangerous sensation. She groaned again, this time audibly into his ear, giving him approval. Claire had never gone this far before. She was hyper-conscious of the fact that many people would be watching this spectacle by now, one of which could quite easily be her boyfriend. This only seemed to make her rub harder against Carrick. Then, seemingly not of her own volition, she arched her ponytailed head back and looked at Carrick. The mutual desire was painfully evident in both of them as their eyes dilated to take each other in. He is a handsome and strong man, she thought. And slowly, naturally, their mouths inched toward each other as their eyes closed. It seemed like an eternity, but when his lips finally touched hers it sent an electric charge bolting through her body. This was it, the ultimate thrill, Claire thought. How could she be so naughty as to do this to her doting boyfriend who was in the same building? Their kiss was visible to any outsider. Carrick still held her tight, she needed it, and soon. Could she wait for 3 hours until she got home to her boyfriend James? She decided that she wouldn't even be able to wait 10 minutes and consequently intensified her kiss as their jaws locked. She felt so hot. Claire felt a strong tap on her shoulder. In that split moment Claire thought she'd been discovered, caught by her boyfriend James. She pivoted around to see the wide-eyed smiles of Chloe and Dave to her left. Oh my God. What are you doing? What if James sees you, you girl? Asked Chloe in a pseudo-stunned tone that failed to scold. Dave winked at Carrick with a grin as Carrick snaked his arms back around Claire's waist. I still can't understand why his boyfriend wasn't watching her. Claire was breathing heavily. James isn't here, is he? She asked, flustered. To her relief, James was dropping off in the 80s lounge. Chloe then grabbed Claire by the arm and led her to a marginally quieter area of the club where they could privately confide as women do. Claire instantly began pleading, "Oh Chloe, you know what I'm like. You're too horny for your own good, that's your problem," retorted Chloe before continuing, "Look, I know you love James, but, well, you know my opinion of him. I'd much rather see you with someone like Carrick who can handle and please you. If you want to carry on with Carrick, then I'll make sure James is nowhere near the scene. Your secret will be safe with me." Claire looked at her friend in the eyes, her lust once again set alight. Without another word, they hugged and Claire returned to Carrick on the dance floor. Chloe and Dave set out to look for Claire's boyfriend. They found him more or less asleep on a sofa where they thought he'd be. Several guys were making fun of him without his knowledge, putting cocktail sticks in his hair. They were like hyenas placing something and then jumping back should he wake. Chloe just smirked to herself and decided to dance with Dave in here for a bit so they could keep an eye on James. They made no attempt to stop the people putting things in his spiky hair. James was a handsome guy and intelligent, Chloe thought, but certainly not the type to keep Claire happy. Yeah, of course you know better what your friend likes. And who would know better than her best friend? Chloe gradually worked into a routine with Dave on the dance floor. She danced differently to Claire, not quite with the same abandon. Claire seemed to dance as if the world was going to end tomorrow, whereas Chloe was slower, more seductive. It also gave Dave a chance to check out her body as he drunkenly dipped his head to the music with a Soul Budweiser held aloft. Back in the 60s room, Claire and Carrick had picked up where they had left off. Carrick's hands were back down the rear of her dress as they kissed. Claire knew she couldn't take much more of this. She'd literally been given permission to do it with Carrick by her best friend, and she was going to make good on that offer. She was going to cheat on her boyfriend and people would know. The very idea was causing butterflies to flutter in her belly. Claire broke the kiss with Carrick gasping for air. "Is there somewhere we can go?" she asked breathlessly. Carrick smiled a big white grin at her. They don't monitor the toilets here. At least, not yet. Claire's eyes widened at him, causing her heart to skip a beat. Go into the toilets? Isn't that illegal? Carrick's smile widened further like elastic, and he grabbed her hand, their fingers interlocking as he led her to one of many toilets. Claire thought she was hyperventilating as they bore down on the gents. She couldn't go in, could she? People would think of her as a pervert. What if James found out? How would she explain it? They reached the door and she was visibly trembling. With a sly look around, Carrick opened it and gripped tightly onto her hand, ushering her through. The instant the door closed, the loud music became muffled and the sharp clop of high heels on the tiles of the men's toilets became ominously apparent to Claire. Two guys were on her left, one of whom turned around and began whooping and jeering when he noticed her. He led her to a cubicle and she stepped inside, her heart thumping like a boxer. She couldn't believe how dirty she was being. In the men's toilets and about to cheat on her boyfriend, almost paralyzed by fear and lust. Her eyes were mad with desire. Carrick closed the door and locked it behind him. No way out now. In an instant Carrick and Claire fell into each other in a deep, meaningful kiss. She groaned loudly, It sounded obscene in the toilets. She pushed harder against Carrick's sculpted chest. Claire then broke the kiss and seductively raised her hands behind her neck and untied her dress. The entire thing slinked to the floor, covering her red toenails and 4-inch heels. She stepped out of it. She leaned forward. Was this really going to happen, she thought as she stared. Yes, this was going to happen. He could feel her hot breath. Come on honey, I know you want it, growled Carrick. Mark my words, you'll never go back to James after this. She shuddered at the mention of her boyfriend, whom she was now in the process of cheating on. Oh, you're good at this. You don't know how long I've wanted you, Claire, Carrick writhed. Back in the 80s room, Chloe and Dave were consumed in each other also, now kissing on the dance floor, eyes closed. It was at this point that James was beginning to stir. He jolted to, causing cocktail sticks and other party paraphernalia to fall from his head into his lap. He also felt a pressing need in his bladder, so he got up and walked bleary-eyed towards the toilets. Chloe and Dave were oblivious. He entered the toilets, relieved himself and then left. Once outside he looked at his watch, given to him by Claire, 1:45. It was now time to leave, but first, he must try to find his girlfriend. Failing that, he would just leave. This was the part of the night he loathed the most, tired, and searching among the dancing zombies for his other half. He didn't understand her compulsion to be with them at all. She was at least as intelligent as he. They both had degrees from the same respectable university. What's wrong with doing something cultured, he thought as he searched around the various rooms. James entered the 60s area and saw various couples kissing on the floors. He half-eyed them suspiciously, wondering if one of them was Claire. She may be flirtatious, but she's mine, he reassured himself. James was just about to leave the entire place when he saw Dave enter the toilets to his left next to the bar. James dashed towards the toilet and slipped through the door just before it shut. Hey Dave, have you seen Claire anywhere around? In the third cubicle along, Claire froze with fear at the sound of her boyfriend's voice in the same toilet as her whilst she was on her knees. No man, I haven't seen her. Try ringing her mobile, Dave replied in that rambling, indifferent voice of his. Yeah, but she'll never hear it. I may as well try. I can always say I tried to call her. Claire quickly tried to fumble in her handbag for her phone before it rang. Too late. The device lit up and the message across the screen read, James calling. Time seemed to stand still. Then the phone started vibrating in her hand. She'd set it to vibrate instead of ring. She looked up at Carrick, suppressing a laugh with a nervous quivering hand at how dangerously close she'd come to being discovered. Breathing heavily, she stood up looking at Carrick, whose face had actually broken from something other than complete self-importance to a look of mild concern. She stared down at it, contemplating their position. A minute passed in silence before an idea struck her. Well, I'm not waiting around here for her, her boyfriend continued the other side of the slim panel. If only he could have seen through the cubicle wall. Where's Chloe? Continued James. Claire bit her lower lip to keep herself from groaning. She's in the 80s room, I think, answered Dave. 80s? I thought she hated 80s music, James replied, a little shocked. Claire couldn't believe how erotic she found it to cheat on her boyfriend when she could hear him so nearby. And then she groaned. She instantly covered her mouth with her hand after she'd done it. Betrayed by her body again. I guess you'd on. What was that noise? Asked Dave, breaking off. I didn't hear anything, said James. Carrick was now tired of messing around. He'd wanted to do it. He met her and nothing, not even her puny boyfriend, was going to stop him now. Claire whispered, slow down, in his ear as he sped up, but Carrick wouldn't hear of it. And so, the noises filled the room. James and Dave looked at each other, grinning. Looks like someone's getting it in the cubicle. Ha ha, laughed Dave, his face suddenly breaking out into life. It was too much for her. She grunted, letting go of all inhibitions, not caring whether her boyfriend heard her. Dave and James looked at each other wide-eyed. We better let them get to it, smiled James, clearly not recognizing his own girlfriend over the muffled dance music. They left the toilets. She screamed. You loved it, while your boyfriend was a couple of yards away. Oh yeah, oh James, come back, I'm being F here, she cried at the top of her voice. James had absolutely no idea that he had just told his own girlfriend and Carrick, a man he didn't even know, to do it in the toilets. Indeed, this thought placated and aroused Claire in equal measure as she thought more and more about it. She and Carrick managed to sneak out of the toilets unseen and meet up with Dave, Chloe, and James around 10 minutes after. Because Claire's lipstick had smudged, she'd had to just wipe it all off, being unable to find her own. Fortunately for her, only Chloe noticed this with a sly grin and a whisper in the ear on the way home. Why no lipstick, Claire? What are you trying to cover up? Chloe had also noticed the blood stains on the back of Carrick's t-shirt. I take it you had a passionate time tonight then, Claire? Chloe asked in the taxi. Claire just nodded with a big grin, still very aware. James looked at them both inquisitively. Claire could tell this was going to happen again and again and again. That night, she basically resigned herself to the fact that she was going to get caught eventually. Later rather than sooner. So guys, what do you think about this? I think that her boyfriend is pretty strange. He left her girlfriend alone with a guy he didn't know. The girl herself is a typical W. Well, you know what I mean. Her friend is also looks like typical WH. Write your thoughts about this.